Ooh, now I'm so curious. You're driving me crazy.
Hello, friends, and welcome to another episode of 119, the Twin Peaks podcast. My name is Nick. I am joined, of course, by Dylan. Hi, Dylan.
Hi, Nick.
And today we are really happy to be joined by somebody who I think within the past year or so, really since the return ended, has really made a name for himself in the community with some really well-produced videos about the return and really just about Twin Peaks in general. We are here with Take the Ring, aka Jeremiah. Thanks so much for being on with us, man.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah, so for those that don't know, you run a YouTube channel that's called Take the Ring, where you tackle a variety of subjects related to the return. I first became aware of you because of the split screen event that was thrown by Matt Zoller Seitz, the great film critic whose work I follow pretty closely. And I actually saw the video from that event, which I shared with Dylan some time ago. And your video was part of those presentations. Your video that was all about sort of Judy and Cooper and Laura and sort of the broad strokes of that whole plan. And I remember thinking, wow, this is like a really excellent video. And then I saw your video started making the rounds again on YouTube, and that you started to post more stuff. And yeah, I've been a big fan ever since. For those who don't know, do you want to just introduce yourself a little bit and just give us some idea of your history with the show?
Yeah, thanks. My name is Jeremiah Beaver. I'm 39 years old. I live in Indianapolis, Indiana, and I've been a Twin Peaks fan for, let's say, 20 years ish. More, maybe 22, 23 at this point. So I was a little too young to see it live, and it was on when I was about 10. So about the time I was 14, 15, so maybe 94, 95-ish. I got into, was getting into movies and indie movies. I was a big Tarantino guy and started getting into like indie films. And my Spanish teacher in high school was like, oh, you'd like this movie called Blue Velvet. And then the rest is history, and I just been a David Lynch fan ever since. So yeah, since like 95-ish, and immediately I was. So I guess it's like personal confession time. I know one of you, I can't remember, one of you guys is in the same boat, but so I saw Blue Velvet and I was totally freaking out. I thought it was amazing, and then there's this UCD and record shop in where I grew up, and this cool guy worked there, and I was telling him about it, and he's like, "Oh, well, you got to see Twin Peaks." And I'm like, what's Twin Peaks? So I was like, that TV show from a couple years back. And he's like, yeah, that's David Lynch. I was like, oh, holy crap, that's awesome. So I ran next door. The video rental store was, basically next door. And I went in there, and the only thing they had was Fire Walk With Me. And I went back, and I was like, hey, well, all they got is Fire Walk With Me. And that's like a prequel or something, right? And he was like, yeah. And I was like, well, can I watch it? Because it's all they had. And I was super amped. I really wanted to watch it. He was like, yeah, I guess it's okay. I mean, I don't know. I was like, great. So I rented it. So I as well watched Fire Walk With Me first. So this was all completely out of context, totally new right out of the gate. Like, freaked me out, blew my mind, totally confused me. It was just this weird. So it did in a way kind of ruin my, spoiler alert about the, who killed Laura Palmer. And on the other hand, so it was a few years later. So I was just so amped, and I had a after school and weekend job, so I always had money going. And so like I rented Fire Walk With Me, watched it, maybe a week or two later, went back and got the pilot and watched it. And then I forget who put it out, but we had a Suncoast at the mall at the time, and they had the VHS box set, and which was like $100 or something, but it was all 29 episodes. It was everything but the pilot and Fire Walk with Me. So I went out, like I got a Christmas bonus check or something. I bought the whole thing, and I like binge watched the entire series in like a couple weeks, maybe a month or less. So I was binge watching before it was cool, I guess. No, I'm just kidding. But yeah, I forget. One of you guys is in the same boat, right? Watch Fire Walk with Me first.
Yeah, that was me.
Yeah,
I also watched Fire Walk with Me first, although it sadly did not lead to me becoming more curious about Twin Peaks. I ultimately became less curious about it. I've told that story more than once before, but I remember. I was in the same boat.
Yeah, it's definitely. I would not recommend it. If someone says, "What should I watch first?" Yeah, start with the original show. However, if you do watch it first, it's not like everything. Yeah, that one spoiler is kind of big, but I kind of wouldn't trade that experience for the world now, looking back, because this is like, it's the genesis of. I think it connects the old stuff and the new stuff, and it's like the prologue and the epilogue of the original show, and connects to the return. And it was the first thing I experienced. And so other than, the big spoiler, it just like the arm and electricity and the red room and all that stuff was kind of like, the palette was already expanded. And then I just kind of had to go back and then watch the show and see how all that fit together. And it was super weird, but
right.
Ultimately, I don't mind it looking back.
I have to say, like, even though I did watch Fire Walk with Me after the fact, so the whole first run of the show was a mystery to me. The revelation of who killed Laura Palmer, although like I have a memory of it being exciting and like mind blowing and all that, but it doesn't like factor into like the things that I really, really love about Twin Peaks in general. So like all those things are there, sort of, like the mythology and all the symbolism and just the aesthetic of it, like all the things that I really love about it, are not dependent on that first mystery. So I think it's a forgivable sin, we'll say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it does give you an interesting framework with which to watch the rest of the show. When you're not just wondering constantly, like who killed Laura Palmer? Like, could it be Andy? Like when your head isn't filled with like these dumb questions, it's in a way it kind of frees you up a little bit to sort of look at the breadcrumbs that were there from the beginning, leading you to believe that maybe Leland was the killer. Of course, there's the infamous funeral scene with him on top of the coffin and everything like that. The show just reads a little bit differently in general if you already know the answer to that question. So it's not like a show-breaking spoiler, but I do admit I wish that I had gotten that experience that people who watched the show originally had with it.
It was pretty cool, gotta say.
Yeah. So you said that the VHS package that you got did not include the pilot, is that right?
Right. So I don't want to get too geeky here, but basically so I watched Fire Walk with Me, which is the theatrical version and it was on VHS tape to rent. Now, the other thing is, people might not know this, but the version of the pilot to rent or buy in the early 90s was the international version of the pilot. Okay. It was the full 2 hour. So not only that, so I watched Fire Walk with Me, and then I watched the international version of the pilot, which the last 20 minutes is all Bob and Boiler Room and Mike and the Red Room and all that. So like I'm just like totally primed, like thinking that this is the whole show, And so then it was like a month or two later, I saved up my money and I got. So then it was the VHS box set was labeled like episode one. Like episode one is not the pilot. Episode one is
Right.
episode one, right? So it was 1 through 29. It was on 5 tapes, 5 VHS tapes. So in my mind, I mean, this is just me personally. I mean, it's different for everybody, but so in my mind, the pilot is the international version of the pilot. Like I know that it's all that stuff was chopped up to make Cooper's dream, and they worked it into the show for like the regular audience. But like that's the version I prefer. That's the one that I like. I like that you get the preview, I mean, you can write it off as Cooper's dream if you want, and then they just kind of touch on it later. But anyway, so the first 2 things I watched at Twin Peaks had tons of the Red Room and that kind of stuff. And then I went out and bought the set and started going through it, and it was like a whole new thing, like bare bones from the get go. Because there's no giant, there's no
Right.
You don't get to Cooper's dreams and the Red Room and Laura and all that stuff till second, third, fourth episode when he starts having the visions and things. But yeah, and then I just plowed through that whole 29 episodes in a couple weeks, and then I had that box set for years and years. I'd let friends borrow it. I mean, we just like wore that thing, wore it down. So when it finally came out on DVD and then later on Blu-ray, it was just like, wow, this looks amazing. It's like, yeah, because I spent 15 years watching it on VHS tapes.
Right. Yeah, it's amazing. That's so interesting that was your intro to Twin Peaks. The Fire Walk with Me and then the European pilot, because I feel like that has way more in terms of the supernatural aspect of it than the majority of the show has. Because I always feel like every time I go back and I watch the original run, I always kind of misremember how much of that stuff is actually in the show, because it's really not that much. Like there aren't really that many scenes in terms of like the Red Room and Bob. I think they're just, each instance of it is so intensely memorable that they tend to loom larger in the mind. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. All right. Well, I guess we should just go ahead and dive into what we're here to talk about today, which is Fire Walk with Me. Yeah, so let's talk about it. This film has, over the years, undergone a transformation in terms of perception that I think is very rare amongst films, or really just art in general. Like, obviously, as everyone knows, the film was very widely despised when it was released. It was a film that nobody really wanted from David Lynch at that point. People were sort of over Twin Peaks and weren't really down for this extremely dark and surreal vision that he had for it. And there were numerous reasons that Fire Walk with Me did not do well, either critically or commercially. But now, and I feel like especially since the return has happened, I feel like it's actually pretty rare to come across a Twin Peaks fan who is just like anti Fire Walk with Me. I feel like for the most part, the consensus around the film has become like pretty close to universally positive. Is that the sense that you guys get as well?
Yeah, definitely. At least in terms of Twin Peaks fans. Like, I haven't seen a Twin Peaks fan that is hated on Fire Walk with Me in quite a while. And I think you're right. I think it does have a lot to do with the fact that the return is such a fitting counterpart, or maybe we can say Fire Walk with Me is a fitting counterpart to the return, that it expands like the depth and the breadth of a lot of the very mysterious things we see in Fire Walk with Me without actually over-explaining and overexposing you to it. So, but I've definitely... I haven't seen a negative comment about Fire Walk with Me since the return came out.
Yeah, I agree. It's agree with all of that. I think that people, yeah, I guess I don't really have anything to add. It was not wanted, not received well. And yeah, just over the years, I would even say even like maybe 20, I really noticed this. I mean, obviously 2014 when the entire mystery box set came out, and Firewalk with Me had, a good, HD transfer, and the sound was all souped up and it was on widescreen, and, and then you had it all sitting there in context with the rest of the series. And so anyway, that's about the time I rewatched everything, and I was like, oh yeah, I forgot. It's one of the favorite shows ever, and Firewalk with Me still great. So I thought Firewalk with Me was great when I first saw it, but again, this is probably 95. It came out in 92, so I didn't get the brunt of all the backlash. But then you looked it up, and it was like, oh man, everybody hated this. And I thought it was weird and wild and opened up Twin Peaks, and I thought it was cool. But then you watch the whole show and you realize, oh, okay, like this is what most people saw, this is what most people loved, and Firewalk with Me is just kind of this one-off. And now, 20 years later or whatever, and people, when they look at that in context of the other pieces, it's like you can't have the return without it. Like it's the crucial thing that like connects Philip Jeffries, Judy, the convenience store, the ring, Bob and Laura, and like it's really the most like honest and personal portrayal of Laura that you actually get, because she's basically a memory in the original show, and she's some sort of phantom golden orb in the return, and like, but this is like her story, so and with content, and again, but people, you get 5-10 years out of some of these things, then you can, I can't remember when you guys said you guys first watched all this stuff, but I guess I don't know what else to say. Just it connects everything, and it works perfectly. And people that didn't have to experience, because I admit, if I'd watched the show live and then it ended on this big cliffhanger, and then they're like, yeah, we're gonna make a movie, I'm like, hell yeah, and you go to the movie theater and watch it, and it's like, geez, it's like, okay, well, we already know Laura's dead, you already know Leland's a killer, you already know all of this stuff that most prequels, I think in general, are not very good, because they spend the whole time either everything is spoiled because you know what's going to ultimately happen, or they spend all their time trying to connect it to the original work, and it usually ends up not being very good. So, but Lynch back then made something completely different in how he wanted to do it, and I think that's why it holds up, because it's not just like some crappy, in the 80s and even the 90s was all about like getting, they get these TV shows and they have reunion shows and holiday specials and stupid, you know what I mean? So at least we got Firewalk with Me, which was interesting and new and different and kind of stands the test of time. At least modern audiences can watch it and get a lot out of it, as opposed to like some crappy TV reunion or something.
Yeah. Oh boy. Yeah. I think the reason it holds up is because, like you said, it's not just an information delivery system. Like, it's not there to like fill in all these blanks that you were left with at the end of season 2. Like, it's not concerned about that at all. Instead, it's really focused on humanizing Laura Palmer and really breathing life into this character that had existed, merely as a symbol on the show before that. And that's why I think it holds up on repeated viewings, is because that effort to humanize Laura Palmer and to place her in her shoes is just is depicted so powerfully. And I think, like, if it had just been a matter of like, crossing the T's and dotting the I's and making sure that everybody's questions were answered from season 2, I don't think that people today would have such a strong emotional reaction to it that they do. And yeah, and now that The Return is out, all these scenes that felt like really strange one-offs, you know, like the Philadelphia FBI office scene, for example, they now just, there's so much added depth to them, and they feel very significant, and in some cases feel like really essential scenes. So it's really fascinating to watch this film now, since The Return has ended, because, you know, while I think that the experience is largely the same in terms of its emotional content, it has just this greater context to it as far as all the symbology and the iconography and all that stuff. So yeah, it's a fascinating thing. I like I said, I can't really think of another example like this where a film has just undergone such a radical reevaluation and recontextualization in this time. It's pretty remarkable. So
Agreed.
yeah. So now that we've just spoken generally about the film, why don't we talk about what actually happens in it? The film opens, first of all, with this opening credit sequence that I love because it features that absolutely beautiful Angelo Badalamenti score, which, first of all, I love the score for this film. Like, the Angelo's score for Fire Walk With Me is on regular Spotify rotation for me personally. I really enjoy it thoroughly.
Yeah, it's incredible. Fantastic.
It really does like pull you in right at the beginning, when as soon as you see that static. Like, if you've seen this film before, like the sounds and like the atmosphere, it's like, I don't know, for me it has this like, it's foreboding, but it's also kind of pretty, and it's got a lot going on.
Yeah, I agree. The soundtrack's great. I just love that opening sequence in general. Like, again, I didn't get this when I was younger, but like, you know, more recently, you know, Lynch is very honest when you kind of like break down a lot of this symbolism and things. It's like right out of the get-go, it's a static TV, right? It's like the signal has been cut, and they're like, he's throwing us signals like, this is not Twin Peaks, this is not the TV show, this is not Twin Peaks, this is not like. So it's a static TV with the signal cut, and you're watching the white noise, which looks like in this awesome kind of blue, right? And then the camera pulls back, and you see a TV, and then someone literally smashes a TV, right? So it's like, this is not the TV show. This is not the TV show. But yeah, and again, and then there's the music, of course, which is all calm. So you're all calm and chilled out, and then the hammer or whatever comes in and busts it up.
Yeah, David Lynch, not a subtle director, I would say.
No. The problem is, it's just the symbols and the imagery is all over the place. So sometimes it's like, is this a direct metaphor, or is he just being a goofball, or, you know, like, he's all over the place with tone and stuff. So it's hard to sort that out, you know. Mm-hmm. But anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. But in this particular case, like, when you see the TV literally being smashed, it's like, okay, I think I understand what's being communicated here. You know, it's not
right.
Like,
yeah.
You know, it's pretty blunt on his part. But yeah, so we get that, and then we get the shot of Teresa floating down the river, and the death of Teresa Banks is really going to be the catalyst for everything that happens, at least for the first 30 minutes or so of this film, which has nothing at all to do with Twin Peaks. In fact, it has to do with the adventures of Chet Desmond and Sam Stanley, who are investigating the murder of Teresa Banks. And I honestly can't imagine what people in the theater must have been thinking during all of these scenes, because it is such a bizarre prologue, and it goes on for quite a while, that I would really love to like go back in time and put myself in the shoes of somebody who is just sitting there thinking like, what the hell is this? Where's Agent Cooper? Where's Harry Truman? Like, what what on earth is going on here? But I have to say, I really do love all this stuff. I love this sort of bizarro image of Twin Peaks that we get here, this sort of mirror funhouse image of a lot of the people and tropes that we recognize from the show. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I like the whole fact. I like just that this is so removed from a lot of, from basically everything else that happens in Fire Walk with Me and everything else that happens in Twin Peaks ever in general. There's this is like a little slice that we get, this little kind of vignette. And I never really thought about that either, that it's kind of like a mirror image of, you know, our introduction to Twin Peaks. But we get all these sort of cantankerous kind of jerks and not the heartwarming, you know, cherry pie. But Chet Desmond has always been among my favorite mysteries in Twin Peaks, and I love revisiting this little slice just because you don't get that much of them. But I think that it really, I know that the first time I saw it, I watched Fire Walk with Me directly, like 5 minutes after I finished the season 2 finale. I just launched directly into it, and I was expecting some subversion, but for some reason my head never went to like, okay, we're gonna get into the heart of the matter of Teresa Banks' murder and see how that connects. It was sort of like threw me for a big loop. So, and I also love the like sort of nocturne, like noir soundtrack that's kind of permeates the whole, like about
Right.
20 minutes straight of just this this kind of classic spy sounding investigation music. It really puts you in a time and place, and there's too many great little moments that I'm sure we'll talk about. But yeah, I'm a huge fan of this whole sequence.
Yeah, me too. Chet Desmond and Sam Stanley, and so again, this was like my intro to the whole thing. But even that being said, that it still holds up for me. I love, yeah, Chris Isaac's just like super cool, and Kiefer Sutherland's doing the kind of, he did this. He has a movie Dark City, and where he plays kind of a quirky weirdo guy.
Mm-hmm.
You know, this is years before 24 and all that stuff, but like he's really good at kind of being a character actor. But yeah, again, this is all because of context and being years later revisiting the stuff. But yeah, it's Deer Meadow is totally another signal. Like, we're not in Twin Peaks. Like, Lucy and Andy are the guy, like the deputy, and they're a bunch of jerks, and the sheriff is a jerk, and Hap's Diner is a dump, and the Norma of Hap's Diner is kind of mean, and I mean everything is just bad. Everything's bad from the get. Everything about Deer Meadow is bad, or the opposite of Twin Peaks.
Yeah, I don't know about you, Jeremiah, but because we got all this stuff with Chris Isaac and Kiefer Sutherland in here, when I was watching the show, I just kept waiting for them to show up. Like, I thought for sure, like, oh well, Chet Desmond and Sam Stanley, like, they're obviously going to show up in the show. Like, those are clearly beloved characters from Twin Peaks that we're going to catch up with later down the line. And I was just so baffled when I got to the series and kind of realized, like, oh yeah, like, those guys never actually came back. That is so wild.
Yeah. And even them, they themselves are. So, Kyle MacLachlan wasn't really hyped to do the movie, and so a lot of this stuff was rewritten, and they changed it to Chet Desmond, and Chet Desmond is CD initials, which is the opposite of Dale Cooper, DC. So you've kind of got your, and he's not afraid to grab somebody by the nose. He's not afraid to be, like, he's not Dale Cooper is great, heart of gold, all that, but he's like respectful and I wouldn't say timid, but he's not gonna like get in somebody's face or whatever. But Chet Desmond, like right out of the gate, especially in the missing pieces context, like he's kind of a badass. He doesn't take crap from anybody, and I always saw Sam Stanley as kind of an alternate Albert, the science guy, the forensics guy that's got a quirky attitude or like a personality. Albert is kind of aggressive and he's all insulting and he's definitely. But Sam Stanley's kind of a goofy, weird, kind of quiet, questioning. He's a little. So this is your alternate Dale Cooper and Albert Rosenfield, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Sam Stanley is like the sort of meek and nerdy Albert, which I really enjoy.
Yeah.
So really, we get a pretty weird intro here to these characters because the first time we see him, we see Chet Desmond making some sort of arrest. He's like arresting some girls outside of a school bus that's just like filled with all these crying children. I always found this very funny just because like we never get any context for it and it's just such a bizarre scene. They're like out in the middle of a field somewhere with this bus full of like screaming kids and there's just no explanation given. I always really like that.
I love it too. It's like one of those moments in The Return, like in the detective's office, where there's just the people screaming obscenities in the background that just never gets, like the pink elephant in the room situation. Like the whole congressman's dilemma bit. It's just that the image speaks so much more than like an explanation ever could. It's like, why is there a school bus of crying children? I don't know. Use your imagination.
It's just like a funny and bizarre image. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's amazing.
Like, it's such an odd way to introduce this character, I think. But yeah, so there's that, and then we get another pretty atypical shot, not just for the show, but for Lynch in general, which is this first-person camera view from inside the airplane that Chet Desmond takes. Like, this to me is as big a signal as any that we're just in a very different place than the show, right? Because we never really see a shot this lavish and expensive throughout the entire show, and it's very brief, but watching it this time around, I was really kind of jarred by it. It's fascinating.
Yeah, it's like the first opening shot of New York City in The Return, which is sort of like, nope, we're not in Kansas anymore. Like this, we're going outside of Twin Peaks now into this wider world with a much broader scope, where a lot more things can happen that you might not expect. So it's a great little signal.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah, and then so right after this is where Chet Desmond meets Sam Stanley, played as we mentioned by Kiefer Sutherland, who, like, on the list of actors that I always forget is part of the Lynch universe, Kiefer Sutherland is probably at the top. Like, I always forget, like, oh yeah, he's worked with Lynch too. It's always so weird. But yeah, I love him as Sam Stanley, and we get a pretty iconic scene right here with this woman Lil doing her, like, a series of pantomimes that ends up being a clue, and this is ultimately our introduction to the concept of the blue rose as well, which is something that, of course, is expanded upon in shockingly great detail in The Return. I don't think anybody expected us to get so much in the way of, like, blue rose significance in The Return. I with regards to this whole thing, I have a question. I guess I'll direct it at you, Jeremiah. why do you think the Teresa Banks murder was considered a Blue Rose case?
Yeah, well, that's the $25,000 question, I guess. But
Right.
so just for listeners and context or whatever, like, so yeah, Blue Rose. This was it. The Lil wearing the blue rose on the dress, and the explanation that Chet Desmond gives Sam Stanley, for 30 years, 25 years. That's it. That's all anybody knew about the Blue Rose, and all it was an inference. People. And then if you met a Twin Peaks fan or whatever, people, what's the Blue Rose? It's like, well, it's obviously these type of cases, like a Bob type case or a serial killer type case or something that Gordon is involved, like these special assignments that might have something supernatural going on, maybe. And then the Blue Rose was on. They used it in the artwork of the DVD box set and or the Blu-ray box set, and so yeah. And then the Secret History book and Final Dossier and The Return, the concept of Blue Rose has been expanded like a million times, and now we know about the task force and all this stuff. But in the context of this movie by itself, yeah, that's all we get. And the short answer is I have no idea. I was thinking about this when I just rewatched it actually yesterday to get ready for this, and I mean, this is one of those things that's never talked about, never discussed, never referenced. It's not in any of the books. It's not like no one knows the Teresa Banks thing. If I'm doing fan fiction in my head or something to try to connect the dots, I think that Gordon Cole and Philip Jeffries started the task force a long time ago, according to the books, and you could argue that in The Return, you could argue that Laura is kind of her gold orb is an antidote to Bob's orb, and that maybe they've been tracking, and based on how the Secret History is, there's like UFO stuff, and there's Doug Milford and the Blue Roses. Supposedly the FBI and Project Blue Book guys have been tracking this stuff or keeping records of this stuff for a long time. So all I think of in my mind is that they were monitoring some sort of disturbance, or Major Briggs' station picked something up, like something supernatural cued in Gordon Cole to this area, and then when they heard that this girl was killed, she's like, oh, okay, this might have something to do with the kind of stuff we're looking into, so send out the boys to check it out, kind of thing. That's all I got.
Yeah, I mean, that's that's pretty much all I got too. I mean, the real explanation here is that David Lynch and Robert Ingalls, with whom he co-wrote the screenplay, didn't know that the Blue Rose was going to end up being this huge thing, so they didn't bother to try and connect the dots strongly between Teresa Banks and the Blue Rose. But I guess in the headcanon, you sort of have to believe that there was something about this murder that tipped them off to something supernatural. We just don't know what that thing is,
Right.
And
right.
Although we do know, as alluded to eventually in The Return, that Cooper was in on this whole Blue Rose thing as well. And in The Missing Pieces, there's a brief scene with he and Sam Stanley where Stanley sort of asks him about the Blue Rose, and Cooper's like, I'm not going to tell you about that. You know what I mean? So
right.
So it all, it makes a loose kind of fit, but still it's not a lore breaking assumption. Nevertheless,
the only other pieces I can think of are just that the Chalfonts were at the Fat Trout, where Teresa Banks lived, and also Carl Rod, I believe, has he is similar to the Log Lady. I haven't read Secret History, so I don't know for sure, but I know that is they were both, I think, abducted when they were younger or something like that, and Carl Rod mentions that. So that whole thing could be related to why the FBI had their eyes and ears in that neighborhood, and then when this young girl gets murdered right there, like you said, Jeremiah, it'll send everyone out to go check it out. Yeah,
I think you're basically right. I especially with Carl Rod in The Return, like he's very similar to the Log Lady, but I don't know how much of that was set up. I don't know how much they had in mind in this movie, because we're going to see him here in a little bit. But he says, "I've been places," and then you find out in the secret history that he was abducted, and he's kind of a grumpy, frumpy old man in Deer Meadow, and then in The Return, he's moved the trailer park closer to Twin Peaks, and he seems to be more of a caring, grandfatherly, kind of a guiding light type person, which kind of fits into Catherine. But yeah, the fact that he's been touched by others is kind of set up in Fire Walk with Me when he has that moment in the trailer park and he says, "I've been places."
Right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So yeah, we get the Lil scene, all her fun little pantomimes here. We get the now famous shot of Lynch holding his hand like upside down over his face, which I always enjoy. And that's pretty much it. We get a scene immediately following this where Chet sort of reveals the logic behind all of the all of the pantomiming that Lil is doing. And from there we go, like we mentioned before, to the Deer Meadow Sheriff Station, which is just a perfect mirror image, I guess reverse mirror image of the Twin Peaks Sheriff Station, right down to the fact that if you look in the background, you can see that the coffee pot is totally empty, right next to Sam Stanley there, which is a detail that I barely just noticed this time around. And yeah, just everybody here is just like a total dick. This mustachioed cop is really aggressive. The receptionist is just reading a book unattentively. She starts laughing mockingly at them at one point. And yeah, Chet and Stanley are basically there to acquire information about the Teresa Banks case. And the police force there is just sort of generally uncooperative, sort of intimidates them a little bit. And so yeah, Chet, in a very un-Cooper-like move, very alpha move, sort of grabs the one cop by the nose, which is a hilarious gesture. That's just like one of many ways in which Chet sort of distinguishes himself from Cooper here. And then he moves on to he goes on to meet the sheriff, who just has this gigantic saw hanging on his wall. It's like a big lumber saw or something like that. Right?
It's perfectly weird.
Yeah. And just to make reference to the missing pieces again, and we should probably mention, like, we're not going to talk about the entirety of the missing pieces in this episode here, but since they are sort of like pseudo canon, like we will be referencing things from that, because there are some pretty relevant scenes in there. Not all of them, because there are a lot that are just sort of like one-off scenes that involve characters from the original run, but there are some relevant pieces of information there, as long as some stuff that's just sort of like wacky and weird and fun to talk about. And one of those scenes is this ridiculous fight scene that Chet Desmond has with this sheriff who's all about bending steel. It is like really, it's like the fight scene from They Live, where it's just like insanely freaking long and funny. I don't know if it's a good scene. I'm kind of glad it's not actually in the movie, but it's I love the fact that it exists somewhere out in the world.
I just love the cut that made it in of Chet like looking at the photo of him bending the steel over his head and then just looking at him over his shoulder like and it just ends there. It's brilliant.
He's like, I could take this motherfucker.
Yeah, exactly.
I agree. The missing pieces are I consider them like essential. Like you kind of just have to. I mean, you don't have to, but like, man, like a lot of the Philip Jeffries convenience store, the context of the ring. There's more stuff with Cooper, like post trapped in the lodge. Not a lot, but a couple scenes here and there that, you know, if you kind of view Firewalk with Me and the Missing Pieces together, or at least as kind of a, you know, a A side and a B side of this type of Twin Peaks or whatever. It's crucial. So I agree. I'm kind of glad the fight scene's not in the movie. However, like I watch it every time. I usually just watch. I usually just watch Fire Walk with Me, and then, you know, maybe the next day or a week later, somewhere around the same time, I'll just go through all the Missing Pieces again. It's kind of like the, you know, it's a lot. I mean, it's like, you know, it's at least an hour, maybe more. But
it's like a full hour and a half.
Yeah, it's 90 minutes.
So, but yeah, so you've got your the deputy and the receptionist. They're kind of affectionate toward each other. So it's kind of like this town's Lucy and Andy.
Right.
Except again, this town they're both total jerks. And I don't know if you notice, I didn't notice this for like years, but this deputy is this guy named Cliff Howard. This is the guy that Bobby shoots.
I knew it. That is that same guy?
So yeah.
Wait,
so this cop is a crooked cop.
Yeah, I knew that was the same guy.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
He's like Chad.
Exactly. The idea is this is your first Chad, a crooked piece of shit cop that's running drugs on the side. So, and if you know, like, well, anyway, so let's keep moving. But yeah, so these are not good guys. You know, the sheriff's a jerk. I mean, maybe the sheriff deep down inside is a good lawman or whatever, but at least this deputy is a scumbag, and this town's Lucy is not helpful at all, and she's probably sleeping with the scumbag cop anyway.
Right. Wow, I'm so glad that you pointed that out to me, that was the same guy, because I never occurred to me whatsoever. I don't know how I didn't recognize that mustache, but now that you mention it, totally is the same guy.
Right. Well, he's wearing in the woods. He's wearing a big coat, and it's kind of all fluffy. And again, like, man, in 1988, a lot of dudes had mustaches
and mullets.
So, mullets and mustaches. Yeah, exactly. So like I said,
wow.
I didn't notice this for years. I want to say it wasn't until the Blu-rays came out. I was like, wait a minute. And then I was, oh, okay. So, yeah.
That's great. I love the fact that, like, I can still learn new things about this crazy franchise. It's amazing.
Yeah, right.
Okay, so we move from there to this autopsy scene where Sam Stanley finds the letter T underneath Teresa's fingernail, which is a scene that is sort of going to be repeated later on. Well, I guess later on in the chronology of the story when Cooper does the autopsy on Laura Palmer, and you know they find the the letter under her fingernail and all that. And from there, Chet and Sam Stanley head over to Hap's Diner, which, like we've mentioned, is sort of the polar opposite of the Double R. It's sort of a dumpy, uninviting place with a very unfriendly waitress. I just want to mention briefly here, and this is a scene that is expanded upon a little bit in the Missing Pieces, but before they actually enter the diner proper, they hang out in this little room to the side here where there's a guy who's apparently, it looks like he's trying to open a safe. It's like he's like trying to weld a safe open. And I only really took note of it this time because they're like these giant electricity flashes, and there's like a random bearded man in a flannel that's just sitting nearby, and it was impossible for me not to think about The Woodsman in the convenience
Yeah,
store.
totally.
And also, not only from, the room above the convenience store scene from Firewalk with Me, but also later on when Mr. C goes through the Dutchman's and he has to see Philip Jeffries, and there's like the woodsman sitting there who like manipulates that big whatever it is, that device that makes the electricity flash and diverts him to Philip Jeffries. I was just like, wow, like this is totally reminiscent of that. I thought it was really neat.
Yeah, I didn't even put those two together exactly like that, but now that you're saying it, it is, and how the shot is, like with them sort of sitting in the corner, it's really similar to the woodsman sitting in the Dutchman's.
Yeah, exactly. It's just like a bearded man, flannel, sitting down, electricity flashing. Boom.
Yeah, and I definitely, without a doubt, I think that Lynch thinks that this is really important, or this movie is, and then Frost wasn't involved with this, but when they wrote The Return together, I think that they went through all of this stuff piece by piece. And so the woodsman, like other than you looking in the credits, these dudes in flannel that are in the convenience store proper, I didn't even know they were called the woodsman or what. Like there was such a minor thing to the whole thing, and then they turned around in The Return and made it into a thing. But I don't know how intentional it was, but like there's always something going on in this Deer Meadow stuff that is signaling to evil or darkness. It's either the opposite of Twin Peaks or there's electricity present. And this is Firewalk with Me is the first thing that really kind of tied electricity into the lodge beings, if you will. Like there's not not a lot of that in the original show. There's tingling hands and weird hums and stuff, but not like electricity proper. So this is the one that kind of evolved the flickering light in the hospital basement. Yeah. Now there's flickering lights everywhere. Oh, but then real quick, the woodsman guy that you saw, I totally didn't pick this up till recently either. So that dude, that woodsman, the bearded guy, if you notice when they sit down at the countertop, that guy comes in from that room, that side room, and sits at a table in the back, and he's literally in frame between Desmond and Stanley while they're sitting there talking to the waitress. So he gets up and comes in and sits down, and he's just kind of this dark bearded guy, and he does drink a beer at some point, but anyway, he's kind of hanging out in the background if you want to add to like some eerie woodsman type stuff. So he basically hangs out in frame with them the whole time in the background. I didn't never notice that before yesterday.
This is why we have you on, Jeremiah. It's for shit like this, for stuff that I totally would not have noticed. But yeah, it's like, I know it's like a pretty minor thing to dwell on, but it was just inescapable to me this time, because it's not just like, oh, there's minor sparks coming out from his welding apparatus that he's using to open the safe. It's like we get this shot of Chet Desmond where the camera is sort of below looking up at him, and it's like these flashes from these sparks just fill up the entire space that he's in, and the shot looks to me, it's like almost nearly identical to the one of Mr. C as he's watching the woodsman do his thing, and it was just like inescapable to me this time. So yeah, I don't know. It's it's always impossible to know with Lynch like what he intends and what he doesn't, but I tend to think that this was just sort of this image, for whatever reason, is just something that really captivated him and stayed on his mind. And I just think it's interesting that we basically got 3 different iterations of this same scene here. It's very bizarre.
Yeah, I think it's totally intentional. I mean, like, I don't think that when they made Fire Walk with Me, he was like, oh my God, this is going to be the shot that it's like no one knew. But going back in The Return, they're like, so The Return gets bagged on for being so, and rightfully so, it's like constantly subverting expectations, constantly like not giving you what you want, constantly not being Twin Peaks as it was. But then, but there's there's 1,000 of those things, like that electricity shot exactly with the woodsman sitting down in the corner. Like, I think they went through. I think there's tons and tons and tons of references to the original show. It's just not Dale Cooper and Cherry Pie, so you get frustrated. But I mean, there's
Right.
shots and sayings that, like, I mean, dude, like, I'm finding these all the time. I mean, I don't know if this was on purpose, but like, Candy with the fly, swatting the fly. There's a fly buzzing around, right? And then she clobbers the dude with the thing. Like, there's actually a scene in the original show of Lucy, kind of another ditzy blonde sitting around, and there's a fly buzzing around the office, and she's kind of following it around. And I don't think that she ever, like, she doesn't like hit somebody on accident, but like every time I revisit the old stuff, it's like, oh my god, they totally went back and referenced that, or at least in the look or the feel or something. So
Yeah. This basically the gist of this scene here is that Chet is asking this waitress about Teresa Banks, because Teresa Banks worked at Hap's Diner, and this waitress implies that Teresa had a bit of a cocaine problem here, and perhaps most relevantly, she mentions that Teresa's arm, her left arm, went completely dead, which we now know is sort of like a side effect of like being in possession of the ring or having the ring on. We're going to see Laura wake up a little bit later, sort of clutching her left arm, and then of course in part 3 of The Return, we get that brief moment with Dougie Jones, the real Dougie Jones, where he's wearing the owl cave ring and he's like having some trouble with his left arm. And I just thought, like, of all the things to reference and bring back in The Return, I was just such a neat little thing to bring back. I felt like just that. I don't know. I tend to really enjoy these little connections that maybe don't necessarily have like a ton in the way of plot significance, but it's just like, I don't know. It's just like giving weight to the symbology of all these little things by repeating them and mirroring them back again. Does that make any sense? Like, it's not a major detail necessarily that like all these left arms are going numb, but I like the way that it sort of ties everything together in an abstract sense.
Yeah, so it's like what you were saying, Nick, about like little things that get recapitulated over and over again. It reminds me of like variations on a theme in music. Like if you listen to like Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, there's this da 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 thing that gets like over and over again throughout like 20 minutes. If you listen to it, different instruments and different tempos and different keys and different ways are doing this like short, long thing that like you might not instantly recognize, but it has this way of like kind of creating this artistic like prosody, this thing where everything kind of works together as one. And I think that Fire Walk With Me does that really well, like in and of itself, but it also like does it really well with The Return and how many things got brought back and got referenced again. But it's like the left arm thing. You can also, I think, tie it to like the whole, that's where the ring goes. It goes on the ring finger on your left arm, and the ring finger of your left hand is where Teresa Banks and Laura both had the letter put in. So, and that's also like the spiritual mound. So there's like all of these different contexts that are telling us like there's something up about the left arm and there's something there, and it's not like super direct, and it keeps getting like recontextualized and put in these different scenarios. But I think it really does help to it makes it feel like it's a mystery that, although it might not be like completely solvable, there are so many moving parts, and there's just all many like sorts of connections you can draw between things that might seem like inane or just completely unrelated.
Yeah, I absolutely agree 100%. I think your music analogy is exactly the way to look at it. I think that that's kind of how not just Lynch, but like good artists in general, like variations on the theme and all of that. That's a perfect analogy. I think that's kind of how he works. I think that's kind of how they wrote The Return. I think that's again, like I said, they don't. There's not a whole lot of things that jump out like, oh, this is old Twin Peaks, this is old Twin Peaks, but there's tons of that little stuff buried in there. I just wanted real quick about the ring. So the left arm going dead thing, when I was younger, around the same time I was getting into Twin Peaks, I kind of shocked myself in science class on accident, like plugging something in. My finger was touching the thing, and so I got a little electricity jolt up my arm, and basically my arm was like numb for like a little bit, like a half hour or something. And then the whole thing about electricity and the idea that the ring is somehow supernatural or tied to the lodge or the lodge beings or the red room or whatever. So I always just took the people's arms are going numb because of the ring, because it's electric and related to electricity. So maybe it's just got this little soft energy that if you wear that ring for like, a week or something, maybe your arm would start to go numb or whatever. And that's just me thinking. So that's what's in my mind when the arm numb thing.
That's fascinating.
That's really good. I really like that. Yeah, maybe that's the origin story here, is that Lynch also got electrocuted in science class, and
yeah,
that's why we have all this mythology.
Yeah.
But so, yeah, from there, the two of them, Chet Desmond, Sam Stanley, they go to Fat Trout Trailer Park, and this is our introduction to this trailer park, and it's also our introduction to Carl Rodd, who, like you mentioned, Jeremiah is much more curmudgeonly here than he is in The Return, where he's sort of a much softer, more benevolent figure who I think sort of functions in many ways as like the moral center of the show. But here he's very short with them. They notice the photo of Teresa wearing the owl cave ring. So this is the first time that we actually see the ring. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. I think this is the very first time that we see the owl cave ring. Okay, I guess there's things I want to talk about, but we're going to have plenty of opportunities to talk about the ring later. So I guess for now, one thing I want to mention is that this dirty old woman shows up. Very odd moment here where I just feel like it's one of these moments where Lynch sort of uses physical decrepitude as like an omen or some sort of harbinger of doom. It's something that he does a lot, where it's sort of like the woodsman or like the weird people in Beulah's house, where it's like he sort of equates like physical disfigurement and rattiness with like bad things. You know what I mean? Like this woman, she's sort of filthy. She has dirt all over her face. She has like a cane. She has an ice pack over her eye. This, to me, is just another in a long line of those. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, it's like a Roadhouse scene almost, where you get these the girl scratching her armpits or any of those kinds of scenes where it's not saying that literally people in this condition are bad people. It's being used more as like a sign of, like you said, some sort of decay, I think is how you put it before.
Yeah.
And also we get like a POV shot of this woman walking into the trailer, and it's all completely like disoriented and almost like fisheye, like from her perspective, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that shot. So a couple things about this. So I don't know what the old woman means. I don't know who she is. I don't know how significant it is. But one, you get that POV shot going into the trailer and kind of into darkness or whatever. It's very similar to there's a shot or two like that in The Return. I can't remember if it's the girl that tells on Richard and he assaults her. I don't know if the camera does that there, but definitely remember the guy that Andy is supposed to meet at 4:30.
Yep.
And then he never shows up, and then later on you get a creepy music shot with the camera slowly going into that guy's trailer.
Right.
And it's
Yeah.
very, very reminiscent of that shot. And then that lady comes in. So this is also kind of reminiscent to the dumpster scene in Mulholland Drive.
Yeah,
okay,
sure.
so
yeah, that would be probably the most famous example of what I'm talking about.
yeah, so I don't know how accurate this is, but I'm just going to say it anyway. But I believe that Lynch somewhere has said, either in a book I read or interview or something, he is terrified, or was when he was young, of homeless people. Like not again, like I don't think he's making a broad statement. I think that some dirty old creepy man scared him when he was young, and really, and I think that this kind of dirty looking woman, the creature behind the dumpster, Mulholland Drive, the woodsman, you're right. I think all of this stems from that. That's his personification of scary or whatever.
Mm.
And also just some, besides the picture in the ring, the picture of the ring in Teresa's apartment, you also there's a shot of an electrical outlet, and you hear this like little throb that you hear later with Chet Desmond by the pole, and that same throb is used in the electricity of Philip Jeffries when he shows up in the Missing Pieces. And also there's wood paneling. The whole inside of her trailer is wood paneling, which is just probably more of an aesthetic theme, but something to tie it to Twin Peaks and wood and logging towns and stuff. But those are my thoughts on Teresa's trailer.
Yeah. Yeah, and the other thing that we get introduced to here in this scene is the number 6 pole, like you mentioned.
Yeah.
And the thing that I noticed about this is that in the moment that we cut to that pole, we get this brief moment where the music plays backwards for a second. And then when it cuts away, the music just starts playing again.
That's interesting. I didn't notice that. But I did notice that the arm's little ooh sound is present every time it shows the number 6 pole. And he talks it backwards. So.
Yep.
Yeah. Again, that more clues to electricity, like the whole Philip Jeffries, there's electrical outlets in there. That when the arm says "I sound like this," that little noise he makes, like every time, at least in this movie, you see that pole, you hear that, and you see then they show the top of the pole with the electrical wire.
Yeah. So
this is when I was a kid, this was me in my mind started like, oh, these things maybe like travel through electrical lines, or there's some sort of life force is related to electricity also. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh yeah, no, that's all really good observations. It's just I don't know. I guess I have a thought, but I guess I'll save it for a little bit when we hit on some similar subjects. But for now, the upshot of this is that the FBI ends up taking Teresa's body back to Portland, Oregon, I believe, while Chet decides that he's going to pay another visit to the Fat Trout Trailer Park. He goes there and he finds the alcove ring on this tiny pile of dirt underneath the trailer. And that's it. That is the end of the Chet Desmond storyline. Forever. We never hear anything else about Chet Desmond again. unless you want to count the return in which we learn about, his involvement in the Blue Rose Task Force and all that sort of stuff. So, he is just one of several people like Cooper and like Jeffries who sort of becomes acquainted with this lodgy weirdness and is disappeared somehow from this mortal realm. And that's it. That is it for Chet Desmond in this film. There's really very little to go on here, but do either of you guys have at least a pet theory about the fate of Chet Desmond?
Well, I don't really. I mean, all I can assume is that he maybe put the ring on, and that's it. We don't really know exactly how the ring works, even though we know one function of it is that if you die wearing it, you get transferred into the Red Room, but it doesn't say anything. It seems like Teresa Banks wore it around, Dougie Jones wore it around, but I don't know. That's the presence of the Let's Rock on the windshield. To me, I don't know. We've never seen a straight example though of anyone getting kidnapped by anyone from the Black Lodge as directly as that would seem to be. So I don't really have a theory. That's why it's my favorite mystery, or one of my favorite mysteries.
Yeah, me too. One of my favorite mysteries, one of my favorite characters. I got a bunch of theories, but again, it's all just fan theories because there's nothing to go on. So that's the Chalfont's trailer that he's looking underneath. So we know that Chalfont's Tremont's the old woman, the grandson, something that may or may not have become expanded into the Judy theme or whatever. So you got lodge beings supposedly in that trailer. Mm-hmm. Maybe they got him. You've got, so if you listen when he gets there, and I can't remember how much more of this is explained in the missing pieces, if there's a shot or scene or two, or if this is in the book, but something tells me he goes there. He asked for Cliff Howard's trailer, Deputy Cliff, who's the asshole with the mustache. So he goes there to right. Carl's Deputy Cliff's trailer's over there. So maybe he's
right.
I can't remember. There might be something else, or maybe Desmond's starting to suspect something's up with that guy. Maybe that guy got him.
Mm-hmm.
He's leaning over to get the ring, and maybe Deputy Howard came back. It's this guy's being a pain for me at work, and maybe now he's getting close to my drug running, and maybe Cliff Howard, Deputy Howard, offed him. But again, you have nothing to go on. This is just all speculation. And Let's Rock, of course, is something spoken by the man from another place. So when Cooper shows up there and Chet Desmond is missing, and of course Diane says it in the return. But Let's Rock to me is synonymous with the bad guy, the lodge beings or whatever.
Yeah, totally.
That's all we got. We got nothing to go on.
The only thing we, I think, know for sure is that the ring ended up back in the Black Lodge, because then the arm has it when he tries to give it to Laura, which we know happened a year later. So whatever happened, one way or another, the ring got back. So who knows?
Yeah, that's my.
Maybe Chet Desmond is in the lodge. Maybe that's Twin Peaks season 4. It's the adventures of Chet Desmond trying to get out of the Black Lodge.
I wouldn't even be mad. That'd be awesome.
Supposedly, Chris Isaac is up for it. So yeah. I think that they wrote. I think that they wrote the return and just decided to. I mean, they kept the ring and they kept Philip Jeffries and they kept some stuff. I just think the return was too big, or I don't know. They didn't bring back Chet Desmond or make it. Well, they reference him.
I mean,
reference him, of course. But supposedly, Chris Isaac said if Lynch calls me, I would come back to do it. So that would be sweet. For sure.
Yeah, they couldn't bring back every single character from the Twin Peaks universe for this thing. You know what I mean? There was always bound to be a couple characters where you thought, oh well, I would have loved to see what would have happened with this character or that character, and Chet Desmond just kind of fell by the wayside in that regard. But Yeah, and I just want to say one thing, before we move on from this, is that I want to stick up for Chris Isaac a little bit, who gets a lot of shit for his acting in this, and I just want to say I think he's actually good. I really like his performance here. I think he's really cool. I just want to throw that out there, because like I see again and again, even people who like this movie tend to crap on his performance, but I actually really enjoy him here.
Yeah, I didn't even notice any, like, I don't know. I'm not like the greatest eye for acting, but I don't know. I just think he's cool. Like, I think it, and coupled with the soundtrack, like it just has this, I don't know, maybe if it is a bit, I don't know, cheesy, if you want to say that, but like it works for me. Like the temperament that he's using.
Yeah, that's exactly how I feel. I think he's cool. If there's a line here or there that he doesn't nail, I really don't care. Like he's super cool, and I don't know. I hate to be part of the rumor mill or whatever, but I think that Lynch, like, I don't think they got along, or Lynch was having trouble with him at the time. I don't know, but I heard some negative things about that, but that all could just be rumor stuff. But as of right now, Chris Isaac said that he'd be up for it if they did it, and I love him, so they should just do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think his casting, it's important to remember the context, because at the time in the early 90s, Chris Isaac was seen as sort of like the epitome of cool, whereas if the goal was to cast somebody who was sort of the anti-Cooper, then I think it was a good choice, because Cooper, for all his strengths, he's definitely not cool. He's really kind of a dork. Mm-hmm. So I think it made sense from that perspective. So yeah, why don't we move on to a scene that I think at the time was probably the single most divisive and baffling scene in the entire film, possibly all of Twin Peaks, but now, because of the return, is arguably one of the most significant focal points of the entire Twin Peaks universe, which is the Philadelphia FBI office scene. This scene is just... First of all, we should mention that really this scene is two different scenes spliced together. It's the Philip Jeffries scene, and it's also the convenience store scene. And I suspect that it was probably cut this way simply due to time constraints, because, as we know, Lynch was contractually bound to a 2-hour and 15-minute runtime. So it seems like he just really wanted to include both these scenes, and the only way he could really get it to work was to combine them in this really weird way that I think is fine. I think it works, but man, I would love just an alternate universe where we got the full Philip Jeffries scene and the full room above the convenience store scene, because I think those two scenes separately are so much better when they're allowed to breathe on their own rather than sort of spliced on top of each other.
Yeah, they really are, because there's so much happening individually, like in both of them, that even though you can parse some of that stuff if you watch the spliced scene over and over again, and maybe that's, I don't know, and something fun to worth doing, trying to like see connections between them. But to me, there's so much that gets left out too that I find really really kind of like enticing. But those two scenes, especially, I don't know, they're so different. But like the getting to see David Bowie act in that one scene just as Philip Jeffries is that's in my mind like a lot more than the actual theatrical cut. Like those two scenes are separated in my head canon kind of like inexorably, because there's so many things happening in both of them.
Same. Like when I think about this scene, I often forget that in the actual cut of the movie, he doesn't actually say, or at least it's not audible, all this stuff about like, I'm I went to one of their meetings. It was above a convenience store. We live inside a dream, all this stuff. Like, I think you can sort of faintly hear that, but it just lands so much better when it's allowed to exist on its own, when it's not sort of spliced together with all this, like, jazz music and static and Bob's laughter and all this sort of stuff. Like I said, I like the scene, the way that it's cut together, as presently constructed, but I think that the missing pieces version of this scene is really, really fantastic, and I love just about every little morsel of dialogue that David Bowie has in it.
Yeah, me too. One of my favorite scenes ever. I was definitely a Bowie fan back when I first saw this, and it's just like, well, I mean, I loved him stuff as a kid, Labyrinth and some of that pop stuff, but like it was, you can't. So when I watch Firewalk with Me, when I watch this movie on its own by itself, like I've just accepted that it's this way because that's all I had, and but yeah, this is the best example of how the missing pieces, like if you really want to get into the weeds about maybe what is possibly going on with the return and how all this stuff connects, even though there's discrepancies everywhere. Like, yeah, exactly. You can't, I mean, I saw this a bunch when I was a kid, right? And I don't even think I even caught the We Live Inside a Dream, because there's static and noise and music, and everything Dylan just said is 100% true. 100% true. You have to, if there's only one missing piece that you watch, it has to be this. It has to be the whole Bowie Philadelphia convenience store, all of that in its full form. It's like required viewing as far as I'm concerned.
Oh yeah, I love all this stuff so much. Him just laying his head on the desk and saying ring, ring repeatedly. Yeah, and of course, with the return and everything, I love him putting his hand on Albert's chest and looking him in the eyes and just saying very emphatically, "We live inside a dream." Like, yeah, I just love now that we have the sheriff station scene with the superimposed face and everything like that, it just like gives me goosebumps. I love it.
Oh yeah. Yep.
So, yeah, this is, I almost don't even know where to start with this, because pretty much everything that happens in this scene, like, now has just so much significance. I mean, first of all, even at the time of its release, or I should say before the return, there was some notion that Philip Jeffries pointing to Cooper and saying, "Who do you think this is there?" was making some possible reference to the fact that Cooper in the future is going to have a doppelganger. But now it's like, it's very explicit, in my opinion, that that's what he's talking about, because we get this depiction of Jeffries in the return that he's sort of lost in time. He's sort of misplaced from the physical realm, and he's often very confused, seemingly, about who he's talking to. Is he talking to Cooper? Is he Mr. C? He says, "You are Cooper," and he doesn't really seem to know entirely what's going on. And so now that we've gotten that depiction of Jeffries, I feel like what we see of him in this Philadelphia office scene, the way that he behaves, his reaction to Cooper, all of that just sort of locks into place for me in a very real way.
Yeah, the two Coopers thing, it stands out to me a ton. And it's something that, having not watched Fire Walk with Me for like about a year or so, it was a little fuzzy exactly how it goes down. Because I was always like, wait, does he see himself in the security footage? Because it's just odd that happens, and like Cooper doesn't mention that. Like when him and Gordon will go and look at the security footage, he doesn't mention, because at first he's saying it's 10:10 on February whatever 1989. I was worried about today because of the dream that I had last night, and then it immediately goes to him doing this whole security footage thing where he's trying to see if he can see himself on camera. And then he finally does the second that Philip Jeffries shows up. So like it gets overshadowed by the coming of Philip Jeffries, and rightfully so, because obviously that will take precedent. But the fact that they go back to that same footage and never talk about it is just super strange to me. And I think this is sort of where we're in like in the weeds of the unofficial version versus whatever other versions there may be, and that there's perhaps this dream that Cooper is talking about is like a foreshadowing of the fact that there are going to be two of him, or that there presently is in another timeline, or however you want to think of it. But this timelessness and this like, to me, Philip Jeffries saying 1989 is analogous to Agent Cooper asking, what year is this? It's that same sort of, like you said, that they're completely out of the physical realm, outside of our understanding of time. So that this scene is just so rich with it's just got all the things that kind of fuel the mythology of this show, and it's almost one of those things, like, you can watch it and you understand what it's kind of saying, but there's not a real way to put it in words with a neat little bow. It's just Cooper knows somewhat that his fate has something to do with this duality of self, and that could be it, or there could be more to it. But
or even if he doesn't know, it's like it's at least foreshadowed cinematically with what happens here, right?
Just impressive that it was foreshadowing something that wouldn't happen for 25 years, if ever at all.
Right.
Yeah. I think a lot of this, I mean, that's pretty much, I don't know how much I got to add to that, but yeah, I agree 100%. The only thing is, I think that, they didn't have a lot of this stuff. Of course, Cooper was trapped in the lodge at the season 2 cliffhanger, so the idea of a doppelganger being out there certainly was out there. I think that I don't know if you guys know, but like Judy was, I guess, according to Robert Ingalls, was supposed to be Josie's cousin, and
right.
and Philip Jeffries was investigating, blah, blah, blah. So like, what's cool about this scene is everything you just said is like, they set up so much stuff and it came from a bunch of different places and it ended up so much bigger and complicated in the return. I mean, you can just go on for ever about, like, there's electrical sockets in the wall, and like, I don't know if you're in the return in the FBI office when Dougie Jones is sitting there and he hears the American music and there's a woman walks by. So there's red shoes and wood paneling and an electrical socket and the American flag in that scene, just like this FBI. So Jeffrey's got red shoes. Mm-hmm. Again, the kind of Wizard of Oz thing, but yeah, I always took him as a phantom guy that may or may not, obviously may or may not be there. And now with all the context of the return, I don't know how much I believe this, but like, it just seems that like Jeffries is the old Cooper. Like, Cooper is a new Jeffries, like a guy that has crossed over into the other side. And now, yeah, exactly. Like 1989 is just like, well, what year is this? I mean, it's just I think, Cooper, if he survives whatever happens in the return, then like he's basically Jeffries now. Like, he's trapped, or he exists on that other plane, right? And he's maybe never gonna know. Just like Jeffries, like remember he's talking to in the return, like he's like, who am I talking to? Did you say that, or did someone else say that? Like, there's little things in there that he's like, doesn't know really where he probably doesn't know what year it is in the return either, because he's been his brain's been fried a bunch for all this time jumping and whatever. Again, the electricity thing and the missing pieces, it's more obvious. The lights start to fade and flicker out and you hear that throbbing electronic sound. And anyway, yeah, you could go on for hours about just this little 2-minute scene.
Sure, yeah, and you're right. Judy was originally something completely different that was ultimately cut from the script and that they never really shot, to my knowledge, which, was that Judy was originally going to be Josie's sister. I think maybe even her twin sister.
Or
Sure.
Yeah, Jeffrey's Laura, basically, I think.
Yeah.
Like I was in Seattle at Judy's and I was trying to figure this thing out about this girl, and now everything's messed up. Like it's kind of like Cooper's story too, sort of.
Yeah, it is. It is. So yeah, it's obviously a major retcon, considering that Judy went from potentially Josie's sister to being being sort of like the ultimate evil / driving force potentially of everything that Cooper does towards the end of The Return. That's all sort of ambiguous, but I think it's kind of beautiful that they were able to do that. Like, to me, like, I know that some people look at that act of sort of reappropriating Judy and, sort of giving it a new mythology. They sort of roll their eyes at that, but to me, like, that's like one of Lynch's great strengths, is to like be able to just sort of take a small thing and feel it out and go with the flow and be able to turn it into something that, even though he never intended for it to be that, he just had there was a driving artistic force within him that really felt that it was the way to go. Do you know what I mean? Like, to me, that's something that I enjoy about Lynch. It's not like, that's like just to me, that's just like a wonderful feature of his work rather than like a flaw in it. I look at it as sort of a feature, not a bug type of thing, personally.
Yeah, and I agree that it's definitely something he does well over and over again, and it's really, I don't know when exactly, in the process of making the film that was decided, like the sort of what Judy is, or rather what Judy isn't, but I wonder if it has to do with just David Bowie's delivery of that line, because now it's sort of passed into like, it's a legendary line in Twin Peaks canon, if not the most, one of the most memorable lines. And it obviously has taken on a life of its own, just that sort of one that like, there's so many questions. Like, this is Philip Jeffries, which we've heard. Was he referenced in the original run? I don't think he was. Not at all, right? So here's this whole new character we know nothing about. It's David Bowie, which I'm sure was amazing for everyone watching at the time. But then he just utters this line of like, it's seemingly nonsense. We're not going to talk about Judy, which burns the question in the mind of like, who's Judy? And then it just never gets touched on, except for when the monkey says her name. But yeah, like, it is that ability. Maybe he just heard that line and it took on a completely new meaning to him that was, wholly could completely replace this other idea he had for who or whatever Judy was supposed to be. But it's kind of like that amazing stroke of like letting yourself being open to possibilities, like never closing the book and just sort of letting your creations start to breed their own creations. It's really like a sign of a real master of their craft when they can pull that off over and over again.
Yeah, like, I could easily imagine Lynch and Frost just going down to, write the script for The Return and watching Firewalk with me and just saying, like, ooh, there's just something about the way that David Bowie delivers that line that makes it sound really ominous. Like, we're not going to talk about Judy. We're not going to talk about Judy at all. And maybe there's something there. Like, maybe there's an interesting idea that we can use to spin off into something more. And I just love that.
Yeah, I just learned this recently, but so he does this all the time, and just like Dylan said, I think like a lot of great artists do this, and coincidentally, David Bowie used to do this too. I'm like a crazy Bowie fan, but he would do stuff like he would do things like songs reference other songs, Ashes to Ashes is a sequel to Space Oddity,
Yeah.
kind of explaining what Space Oddity is all about. And then, he's Station to Station was like, 70s album with the red hair, and he's got this blue suit with these like white chalk stripes on it, right? And that was just like the idea for the album cover. Well, then 20 years later, in the 90s, he's doing the Outside album, which has kind of got an alien type feel to it. So he's got short. It doesn't look like it. It's not instantly noticeable, but he's got short orange hair. And then live on stage, he had these like tattered clothes with these white chalk stripes on it. So it's kind of like a reinterpretation of like pulling back themes and ideas and even costumes and looks and but if you're creative about it, it doesn't feel like you're grasping at your past or trying to recreate something. It's like, I'm going to take a little element of my past and I'm going to flip it, and it might resonate with people, And so speaking of that, like supposedly Robert Ingalls said, so Fire Walk With Me was going to open with a nuclear bomb explosion and some bugs being turned into these lodge beings. And so we didn't get that. I got to verify that. I heard that from Cameron from Obnoxious Anonymous, and I were talking about it. And so I haven't read the actual interview, but long story short, there was going to be so you can say that was an idea that was scrapped. And then when revisiting the return, it's like, okay, I'm going to do it again. But obviously it changed, and it fits more with Mark Frost's Secret History and the UFOs in the Roswell, New Mexico, and the bomb testing and all that stuff. And so they expanded the idea, and so the bugs are like frog moths now or whatever. So arguably, but the whole point is that basically anything left on the cutting room floor of the show or the movies or Lynch and Frost, like they pulled from everything, even stuff that was like, like Freddy, the Green Glove with Freddy. Supposedly Lynch has had this in his mind since the 90s of Jack Nance having a green glove that had some kind of power or something. So even unused ideas or half-evolved ideas, they pulled from all that stuff to do the return. So the scene, classic example. The scene's perfect in regards to that.
Yeah. Wow, I'm like looking online right now to try to find some reference to Robert Ingalls mentioning the atomic bomb. I haven't found anything, but I don't see anything. But if that's true, that's fascinating.
Yeah, so I know the Judy stuff is true. I've actually read.
Yeah, I've read that as well.
Yeah, but I gotta dig into find out exactly where that is. But supposedly there's a mention of a Formica table even, and that's where the arm saying this is a Formica table, green is its color. Like, so apparently there's
right.
So who knows? But the Freddy thing and the glove thing, that's like for sure. A lot of the stuff in this Philadelphia office sequence is the same. Like take Judy, kind of an unused, unfinished idea, and when they do the return, we're gonna blow it up and make it something.
Right. Yeah. So I guess I don't know if you've read this too. And speaking of things where we can't remember where we sourced them, but I seem to remember there being some news that broke, I think relatively recently, that Lynch had originally planned to make several films in the Twin Peaks universe. Is that correct?
Now that I don't know.
But it just didn't happen because of Fire Walk With Me.
I haven't heard that for sure. I think that maybe I think Robert Ingalls, some stuff I've read of him, said that, again, you had these ideas like Judy and things that they didn't have time to fit in and didn't have time to use, but the idea was that if they did another one, then they could start expanding on that stuff too. But I've never heard anything of. I've never heard David Lynch say, "Oh yeah, I was going to make 3 Twin Peaks. I was going to make a Twin Peaks trilogy
Mhm.
trilogy, but Firewalk with Me wasn't
Yeah,
received well.
I'm looking right now. There's an article on Mental Floss where it says Lynch apparently planned a trilogy of Twin Peaks films, but the idea was abandoned after the poor reception to Firewalk with Me. And like I don't know, like maybe it's true, maybe it's not, but it just makes me wonder, like ever since I read that, I've always had this question in my mind of like, were there things that ultimately ended up in The Return that he had conceived of at the time? And maybe that's why there are so many connections to Firewalk with Me, and why so many of these things felt like red herrings and dead ends at the time. Like maybe he had originally thought that he was going to get to make more films. I just think it's interesting to think about.
Yeah, that's awesome. I hadn't heard that, and I totally just threw that trilogy thing out of nowhere. Like, I didn't know. If that's true, that's amazing. He was going to do 3 of them, and it kind of makes sense, especially if you know, I can see him like, okay, we're going to go back and do the first one, and we'll recap Laura, and we'll do this, and we'll introduce a bunch of stuff with Bowie and all that stuff, and then maybe do that's pretty awesome. But yeah, I think it's safe to say
I'm seeing another reference to it also on denofgeek.com. So I don't know.
Okay, that's super cool. I've never heard that before. I think that, but I think it's safe to assume that anything that was thought of by Lynch and Ingalls and Frost, and I think everything was up for grabs, and I think most of that stuff got worked into The Return one way or the other. So again, they ditched Judy being Josie's sister, but the concept of Judy and Philip Jeffries has either seen her or knows something about her. Like, you know, they definitely just, okay, here's all the ideas we had that we never got to use, and then they remix them to work with the new story, you know?
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so, yeah, the Philadelphia FBI office scene, pretty heavy scene in terms of things to talk about. Like, we could probably just do an entire episode about that one scene, but we should probably move on.
Yeah, probably
for time's sake. So yeah, I guess the last little bit of this is that Cooper goes to the Fat Trout trailer park, and he goes to the vacant trailer site, and something I'm a little embarrassed, but I couldn't quite make it. Is the trailer site that he goes to, was that where Teresa's trailer used to be?
No. It was that's
so
the
did he
that's
did he
where
just
Chet Desmond disappeared.
Gotcha. So he just saw. So sorry, I'm having a little trouble.
He sees like the vacant lot, and he's like, "What used to be
right?" Right, but did he have some information about what that vacant lot was before he checked it out, or was he just like, "Hey, what's up with this vacant lot?"
He's walking in. Carl Rod's like, Teresa's Banks' trailer is that way, and he's like, I'm not going over there. And he's like, where are you going? And he says, I'm going over here. So I think there was just something that drew him to it, like some of that like Cooper intuition. But I don't think he even went there with the intention to go there. I think, assuming from what Carl Rod said, he went there to investigate the Teresa Banks trailer. But I don't really know.
I think the scene breaks down like this. It's basically a mirror image of the Chet Desmond scene, because Chet Desmond shows up with Carl Rod and he says Deputy Eclipse trailer's down there and Teresa Banks trailer's down there. And then, Carl walks away, and then Chris Isaac turns around and doesn't go in either of those directions. He goes in this other direction to like, what's up with this trailer? Right. So he's kind of called to this trailer too, right? So then the Cooper thing later is basically the same thing, and Carl saying, and they mentioned Deputy Cliff again. He's like, I told everybody Desmond showed up. I said Deputy Cliff's trailer's down there and Teresa Banks' trailer's down there. And then Cooper, he starts just walking in this other direction, and he's like, where the hell are you going? He's like, I'm going over here. So Cooper ignores the Deputy and Teresa Banks trailer and goes to the same spot that Desmond did. And then my favorite line in the movie, he says, thanks, Carl. sorry to wake you, meaning he did what those other guys did. Remember the sign on the door, don't knock before 9 a.m. ever. It's freaking hilarious. So they wake Carl Rod up early, and then the sorry to wake you is a reference like, oh, Cooper must have shown up and woke him up early too, so he's probably all salty, but Cooper apologizes, and there's about 15 seconds of levity in this whole movie, and that's a little bit of it right there.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, Cooper, he goes over to this vacant trailer site, and Carl tells him that it used to be owned by 2 Chalfonts. Which, of course, now it's impossible to hear that without thinking about part 18, in which Cooper, visits a place where he's expecting something to be there that isn't there, and finds out that it used to be owned by 2 different Chalfonts. Yeah. I don't really, I don't have like some grand theory about that. I just find that symmetry kind of inescapable and interesting.
Yeah, I think it's what we've been talking about this whole time. Just this sort of uncanny ability to give you pause for a moment when you see a scene. Like, is this familiar? Like almost like deja vu. Like and it's almost like you feel like you're sharing that experience with the character as well. It's pretty amazing. But like when I heard that, 2 Chalfonts, pretty weird, or whatever he says, I got like chills, because it is pretty weird, and it continues to be pretty weird for quite a while.
Yeah. Chet's car has "Let's Rock" written on it. Looks like in lipstick or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And we get the iconic interior view of where we see it like from inside the windshield. Did you have something you wanted to say about that, Jeremiah?
Oh, just so kind of, if we're tying everything to the return, this interior shot looking out at Cooper with the "Let's Rock" lipstick, and I want to say the sound is kind of muffled a little bit. I don't know. I can't remember if Harry Dean's talking or not, but this is reminiscent of Diane, who also says "Let's rock" in the return. And there's a shot after the homeboy gets his skull crushed, right, in the car, and then it's muffled. They say, we need to call backup, and she's kind of peering in the windshield, and she says something like, there's no backup for this. It sounds kind of muffled, and it's coming through kind of a windshield look. But anyway, those two scenes kind of tie together, and it's just this is like a primer for what Cooper's about to, more or less, since this is a prequel. This is kind of Cooper, this is kind of what the idea that maybe he's already getting into some supernatural or some weird stuff before he even gets to Twin Peaks, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right. It's the same words that he's going to hear from the arm in his
his
dream,
of course.
quote unquote.
Yeah, that too. So, yeah.
Yep. And so the last little bit from this whole Teresa Banks thing is that we get just a small scene of Cooper speaking to Diane in his tape recorder about just sort of generally about Teresa Banks and about Chet Desmond disappearing, and he's standing by the river where Teresa Banks' body was found. And then we do a very jarring cut to Twin Peaks, where we get the 1 year later title card. We get Falling by Julie Cruz playing, and it's like, boom, all of a sudden we're in fucking Twin Peaks. And we see Laura, Donna, Mike, Bobby, and James all within a span of like 45 seconds. It's just like all at once, like, okay, no, like for real, guys, like we're in Twin Peaks. Like, I know you guys are probably really confused, but we're here now. We're there. We're in Twin Peaks. But almost immediately we get this scene of Laura doing coke in the high school bathroom.
Yep.
And that's really the first sign that it's like, oh, this is going to be a different depiction of Twin Peaks, isn't it? Like, we're probably going to be exploring some slightly darker corners of this town than we're used to.
Yeah, reminds me that the cut almost reminds me of like the cold cut to Audrey after whatever 13, 14 episodes. Just sort of like, boom, okay, here it is. We're here now. You got it. And then give it a couple minutes. It's not what you think it is. It has a little bit of that homecoming feel that is immediately like, oh yeah, that's right. This is around the time that her life was completely spiraling into chaos and disarray, and she's doing bumps in the stall at 8:00 in the morning just to act normal. But yeah, it's truly from here on out, like all the kind of like, I mean, there's a lot of still like great mysterious moments, but at least for me, from here it becomes a completely emotional ride, one that takes you to a lot of really dark places, and that little bit of her dark side, just a little bump that she does, it's just like, oh, just like the tip of the iceberg. So yeah, every time I see that, it's just like, oh, here we go.
Yep, it's just throwing us in right off the bat, just preparing us for the fact that we're in for some dark shit, and it's not going to be the same. And on that note, we get Bobby kissing the glass with the prom photo in it, which I believe is the alternate prom photo, is it not?
Yeah.
Like, it's not the same one that was used in the show?
Mm-hmm. They're basically kind of flipped. So the prom shot from the original show is at her home in the Palmer house, and it was vice versa in the show. So it's just like a little slight head tilt.
I see.
Right.
Gotcha. Yeah, it's just a little bit different, but if you're like us and you've looked at that prom photo like a million zillion times, you're able to notice that it's just a little bit different, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. Yep. So we get this brief scene here of Laura talking to James, and this is like, I don't know, maybe the one instance that I would consider to be of questionable quality in terms of the writing here. We get this pretty infamous turkey scene going on here, where Laura says "gobble gobble," which I think is funny because it's not the only like infamous gobble gobble throughout cinema history. There's also in the movie Geely with Ben Affleck and Jennifer Lopez, where she's like trying to seduce him, and she also says something. She's like, "It's turkey time, gobble gobble," and that's like probably the most infamous scene of that movie. I don't know. It's just weird to me that we have two separate instances of like gobble gobble being like sort of mock worthy in cinema history.
I had forgotten about the dialogue because I remembered this scene just because it's another one of those like, oh wow, this is Laura Palmer kind of scenes. And visually,
and oh by the way, she we see her breasts as well, which is also shocking.
Yeah, right, exactly. And it's like, so I remembered it being kind of like a heavy scene, and then I'm watching it again earlier today, and I'm like, oh my god, that's right. This whole thing's about turkeys. He's like, you're not a turkey. Turkey's one of the dumbest birds out there. It's like if anything is like gonna maybe harken back to like Twin Peaks as a faux soap opera, it's like you get this one little piece of melodrama here, this little turkey makeout session, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah. I think so. I don't know if you remember the missing pieces. It's not the same thing, but in my mind, it's similar. She's talking to Donna and Doc Hayward, and this missing pieces, and she says, you know, like, "Oh, Donna, you're a muffin," or they call each other muffins, and then she walks away and she's all sad, and then she says, "No, Donna, I'm the muffin," and it's kind of like I don't know what that means or whatever. I think that the turkey and the muffin, and there's some other little things. I don't know if it's in the original show, but I think it's just maybe Lynch and them, like, it has a very like 50s like innocent joking vibe. I don't know. I think it's just kind of like a reminding us all that they're still kids, right? Like they're saying silly things, and they're making up little words like, "Oh, you're a turkey and you're a muffin," and I don't know. I always I throw it
just
in that,
just dumb little inside jokes.
Like, I mean, and it's just but it's definitely silly on screen, like very out of. Especially like, well, this is supposed to be super dark, but they're still kind of talking like little goofballs and stuff. But even though we're back in Twin Peaks, we've already been the first act of the movie. That's one thing I can say. I think there's some flaws in this movie, especially not having a lot of that missing piece of stuff in there. But I'm super glad that the first act basically is the Chet Desmond, Philip Jeffries, Cooper, FBI, Blue Rose stuff, and then the second act, when we get to Laura, we jump right into like, okay, she's got a drug problem. Okay, she's got a boyfriend, and she's seeing somebody else, and okay, like he doesn't spend the first act trying to establish Laura as innocent, and like there isn't a whole lot of like, I don't know, if this movie was made today, I think that, or movies like this, the first act is always like, this is the girl, and she has friends, and she's sweet, and she's nice, and like she's sweet, and then in the second act, like, oh, then things get dark and whatever. I'm just glad that they just like jumped right into it. And although the best scene, one of my favorite scenes in The Missing Pieces is the family dinner scene where they're actually smiling and laughing and having a good time.
Yeah, I love that.
I think that scene would set up to be more like, if there was more time at the beginning to show like, hey, this is a nice girl with a seemingly nice family, but because they had the time constraint, they just jump right into her being like not in a good situation, which I think helps the film, honestly.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, like in a normal movie, there would be this whole setup of like, oh, she was just a nice suburban girl until she fell in with the wrong crowd. But in here, we're just sort of skipping all that and getting right to the meat of it. But yeah, I would have loved to have seen the dinner table scene that you referenced in there. I think that generally one thing that would have benefited this movie is just a little bit of levity, like obviously the heart of the movie is very dark and the movie is great as is, but I would have loved to have seen just a little bit more of the Palmer family dynamic that isn't all just pain and abuse and crying, just to sort of provide a little bit of contrast. Like, I love the dinner scene, and I also love the scene where Sarah is telling Laura not to smoke, like if you don't start, you never have to quit or whatever, just being a sort of typical mom towards Laura. And we never really see that throughout the entirety of Twin Peaks. And I would have really appreciated some of that stuff being in the final cut, because I think that if we had that to contrast it with all the really, really dark stuff, it would have maybe hit just a little bit harder. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I feel like too, there's so much in so many consecutive scenes where Laura is just tortured that it's almost like fatiguing, just emotionally. To put yourself in, like, this is your protagonist, so you're kind of taking on what she's taking on, and then scene after scene of just, like you said, crying and desperation. But I think it does, even though it's a bummer, and it maybe would have been nice to have some of the levity in some of the other side of that, which I agree it would have been. But I think that if its job is to kind of really depict as best it can what Laura is going through, that relentlessness is part of, I think, her pain, and that like there is no safety, like there's nowhere to run, there is no levity, there is no brightness. Not because that's a huge theme for Lara throughout this film, is her own concept of hope, and when she loses that, like what really happens and how that affects her. So but I that dinner table scene is it's hilarious, but I watched it after watching the movie, and it's like you're just so used to seeing Leland in his like demented, horrific form that it almost had like a backwards effect where I was like, oh, this is wrong. Like they're all so happy and nice together. Like it almost like sucked out any of the goodness from it.
Yeah, I mean, that relentlessness that you describe is definitely in keeping with the themes of the movie. But I just think, like, as an audience, it would have been nice to have had a breather every now and then, because I do feel like by the end, it's just so punishing. It's just one scene after another of Sheryl Lee just sobbing and crying and being manic that I would have appreciated just a tiny bit of respite in there somewhere.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
It's exhausting.
Yeah. So we go from all the gobble stuff to this scene outside the high school with Laura and Bobby, where Bobby is behaving very aggressively towards her. He's sort of jealous. I don't know. It's just like high school melodrama bullshit. And I love the way that she just effortlessly uses her charm and her smile to make him just be like, I love you, babe. Like, she just manipulates him so well that it just makes it clear that Laura is operating on a completely different emotional plane than the people around her. You know, like, she's just a much more she just has like a much more complex psyche than Bobby. Like, he's just kind of like a dumb puppy dog, and she can just manipulate him at will, basically, without even so much as trying.
I love this scene. There is a darkness to it because of what you're saying, because of like how she has that ability to be almost removed from the situation emotionally so that she can manipulate others. But Bobby's fucking backwards walk kills me every time, and there is no gif for it on Twitter that I can find, so I need to just make one and find out how to make gifs. It just right. Oh, it's so funny. Like, not only does she like pacify his anger, she like puts him on the moon. He's just like, oh, I love you, babe, and just backwards walks like a boss on out of there. It's just, I love it. It's so funny.
Yeah.
It's a great. It's a great scene. Totally true. All you said. And that fits into the original series too. Like, you know, Bobby tells Dr. Jacoby that, like, you know, she really had his hooks in him, and like Bobby's not a spring chicken, and he's not innocent. He's doing drugs and dealing drugs too, and so he's not, you know, he's not innocent here. But it totally shows that and James references, everybody references it, though. Laura had a way about her. Laura had a thing. She could get anybody to do anything for her or whatever. And, you know, since this is the only time we see Laura Palmer alive, I think this whole sequence is specifically for that, to like show you, like, yeah, she's the victim and going through her own stuff, but she still has power over other people, which is arguably what Bob is pursuing, right? And then the other thing, real quick, I never noticed this before. I mean, that the opening of that sequence is a shot of like just random students walking, and you see before Bobby runs up to Laura, there's a random woman or girl like running through the shot. So it's a sea of legs, right? It's just like waist down girls and high school kids standing there, and a girl runs through the shot. And it's kind of reminiscent of just having a random person running through the high school grounds always struck me as a connecting to the pilot with the screaming girl when Donna hears that when she realizes that Laura dies, this is a screaming girl running
Right.
through the thing. It's basically the same kind of courtyard, or I don't know. Anyway, that shot always. Why is that shot there? Why didn't it just start with Bobby running up to Laura? But it's like, it's a few seconds of these high school kids just standing there, and a girl runs through the frame. I just thought that was interesting. I don't know.
Right, yeah, I never picked up on that, but I know exactly what you mean. Yeah, and then it's that shot that basically opens the return as well.
Yeah,
Right?
exactly.
It's like,
yeah.
And
it's like all slow motion and everything.
And the fireman puts it in Andy's vision, so it's important.
Yeah.
For some reason.
Yeah, exactly. And then just the last thing about this scene is that this song, this really silly song, is playing over it called "A Real Indication," which actually just resurfaced on the recently released Thought Gang album, which is a musical collaboration between David Lynch and Angelo Badalamenti, and it has a few of these like old, weird, like prog jazz spoken word pieces on it. And this is one of those songs, and we're actually going to hear it again a second time later when Laura is like on her bed. I think she's like about to go into her diary when she notices all the pages are missing. She's like sort of rocking her head back and forth, and this song is playing again over that scene, I do believe. So yeah, we go from there, and we get a scene I love between Laura and Donna. We should probably mention that Donna in this film is, of course, played by Moira Kelly rather than Laura Flynn Boyle, for reasons probably having to do with Laura Flynn Boyle being a huge star at this point and probably feeling really jilted by the way that Twin Peaks ended, as a lot of people were, including Kyle MacLachlan. That's probably the reason that she didn't agree to come back, is my guess. But nevertheless, I really enjoy Moira Kelly as Donna, I gotta say. In fact, it may be a controversial opinion, but I think I kind of prefer Moira Kelly's depiction of Donna. And I really enjoy the way that she brings sort of a wide-eyed quality to these scenes where that I think is really important when you're seeing her react to all of the scuzzy stuff that Laura gets into, as opposed to Laura Flynn Boyle's portrayal of Donna, which was a lot more stoic. Yeah. Anyways, I really appreciate Moira Kelly's performance in this. I just wanted to say that.
I agree. I think she has more of a like Donna in Fire Walk with Me has a very misguided sort of energy about her, where she looks up to Laura and like kind of doesn't really know what she's getting herself into with a lot of this stuff, in a way that the character of Donna in the original run, although I enjoy Laura Flynn Boyle's portrayal of her, and like I like all that stuff,
absolutely, yeah,
but it doesn't have that same dynamic where you buy the fact that this not only are they best friends, but Donna really idolizes Laura and sort of looks at this like Laura is keeping her at an arm's length as like she's misguided. She thinks that it's just Laura trying to be cooler than her or have more experience or keep her out of the experience, so she wants to be involved in it, and ends up getting way more than getting involved in way deeper than she was probably expecting that night. But yeah, I was thrown off at first. I didn't know that was a thing. I was like, who's this person? Like when I first watching it, I was like, who's this person? And then she keeps calling it Donna. I was like, wait. And I had to like pause and do a quick search, like, oh, no shit, that is Donna. But I really like her performance too.
Yeah, I don't think I think you'll find you're not alone in, or Nick, I mean, I don't think that's a controversial opinion in my experience with Twin Peaks fans. I think that lots and lots and lots of people really like Maura Carroll. A lot of people this movie really lands with, and a lot of people like prefer her performance better, or I mean, she's a great actress, and I think she nailed it, and I think it works too. Like the this, like you said, this Donna is more innocent. Like I don't think this Donna is Laura's best friend, but doesn't see really what's going on with Laura. And then, of course, in Lara Flynn Boyle in the original series is the like, hey, I knew Laura better than anyone. Like she was, going through some stuff, but this movie's great too. So yeah, it's like a different. Donna's more mature now because her best friend's dead, and she got a glimpse of what was really going on with her. So it's kind of, even though they're different actresses, like it's kind of seamless to me when I watch them, because they just feel Laura Flynn Boyle's more mature, it seems, or at least trying to be not as innocent. And this is also about Donna, kind of. Fire Walk with Me is about Donna losing her innocence a little bit too. But then it also plays into this scene with them on the couches is great, because she's what would happen if you fell down the hole or whatever, and she's like, I'd fall faster and faster and burst into flames, and Laura is sharing like her deepest, darkest feelings with Donna right there at that moment, but it's just a small sliver of it, and Donna thinks like, oh, that was kind of weird, that she would say that. And so another thing I think this movie resonates a lot with people, like as far as like victims of abuse and stuff, like at least to me, I was always kind of like, well, why, if Donna's really her best friend, then like why doesn't, like I tell my best friend everything, like why wouldn't Donna, like Laura, break it all down? And the secret diary, but then this movie too at least gives you a glimpse of like she's also protecting the people, Donna and James. She's not telling them everything because she wants to protect them too.
Yes.
Like
right,
she doesn't want them to feel less of her. She also doesn't want them to get involved with Bob and drugs and all the crazy stuff that they're in. And I think that resonates with people. I think people a lot of people that are going through traumas or what, health problems or abuse or whatever it is, a lot of people don't share it with the people they should, because they don't want to hurt their friends too, right? Like they basically. Right. So anyway, my thoughts on Donna.
Yeah, and this whole scene right here where Donna poses this hypothetical to her where, do you think if you were floating in space that you would slow down or go faster and faster? This is sort of Laura's like covert, indirect way of signaling that her life is going out of control. When she says that, you'd go faster and faster and then you'd burst into fire and the angels wouldn't help you because they've all gone away. And, a lot of this movie is pretty heavy on angel imagery as well, which we'll get to. But yeah, this is just like a bit of foreshadowing, probably, of what's to come.
Big time, yeah.
And and then we get some more revisionist history as it applies to James, where Donna says that James is gorgeous and he's so sweet, and it just makes me laugh when people talk about James like in these James Dean-esque terms, like he's just like the hottest, most mysterious man on the planet. It's good.
He's pretty cool,
good stuff.
Though.
Oh yeah,
he always
been
was.
Cool. Yes. So anyways, Laura goes through her secret diary. She gets it out from behind her dresser, and she notices that some pages are missing, and she finds this horrifying. She immediately runs to Harold Smith and gives him the secret diary and tells him that Bob took the pages, and he's sort of like telling her, oh, Bob isn't real, etc. And Laura says to him, Bob says he wants to be me or he'll kill me. Which is interesting. Why do we think Bob wants to be Laura?
Well, I think it's just to keep himself like out of this deal that he's seemingly made with like above the convenience store, whatever this deal is that they have, where he is possessing Leland and harvesting all this Garmin Bozia. He obviously doesn't want Laura to die, because then he has to do his like whole payout that we end up seeing. So I assume that he is trying to inhabit Laura so he can actually continue this like gambit and then bring all sorts of more pain and suffering. But he's like, when they're in the missing pieces, when they show the full above the convenience store scene, Bob screams like something like, I paraphrase, like, I'm being carried by the strength of my own momentum. Sort of like he wants to be like autonomous and independent, and still, is doing that in the return. Just he's using Cooper's doppelganger as his vehicle rather than Laura Palmer. But I think to him, it's just whoever he could hop onto to like continue this streak. But that's about what I got.
Yeah, I agree 100%. This is something to do. Like, I get the feeling that, yeah, I mean, that basically sums it all up. They want, well, so something I just noticed yesterday watching this again. So the grandson in the convenience store points and says, "Fell a victim." Mm-hmm. And I always thought that meant somebody has fallen a victim to something. Like, I always thought he was pointing to the arm, and fell a victim meant that the arm, you remember Mike used to be bad and he turned good, or something. I don't know. I never knew what that meant. And now I think it's a command, like, fell a victim, like you need to go kill somebody. And Bob, like you said in the missing pieces, he says, I have the fury of my own momentum. Basically, like, don't tell me what to do. Like, I'm more powerful than the rest of y'all, which kind of fits in the return. Like, it seems like all the bad guys are these little eggs and things or whatever, and Bob is like this giant. It seems that Bob's like the alpha of these creatures, right? Sort of.
Yeah, definitely.
In a way. And they're like, "Hey, you got to go kill somebody." And he's like, "I have the fury of my own momentum." And then the arm says, "With this ring I thee wed." That's where I think that the ring is symbolic of, like, basically whoever puts the ring on next is who you're going to kill, kind of thing. Something like that. Mm-hmm. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like a union, because it's like, with this ring I thee wed. It's like you are going to, whoever wears this ring next, that's who you're tied to. That's what the terms of this deal is. Which I don't know why that's how I'm looking at it, but I think that's like, it seems like they're striking some kind of an agreement or whatever, and that statement about the ring, that the ring is like the symbol of that deal, and of course many other things throughout Twin Peaks.
Yeah, and then you have the at the end is Mike in the arm saying, "Bob, I want all my Garmin Bozia, like, right. I want what you owed me." And then there's also, sorry, about why does Bob want to be Laura? So you get a glimpse, you hear a little sliver of this, but it's more obvious in the missing pieces when Laura's under the stairs and the fan is going, and especially if you turn the subtitles on, like, he straight up says, like, "I want to taste through your mouth. I want to do what, like." So he is, I believe, because Laura is a sociopath and surrounded by people that she can manipulate, and there's drugs and apparently people dying around her, she's got her fingers in everyone in the town. And to Bob, that's just like an endless feast, right? Yeah. Like, and then in the pink room scene, or the Roadhouse, or when Donna gets all drunk and they're dancing and all of that stuff that's coming up here in a little bit. I think you hear Bob say, think of what we could do with Donna. I got to verify that, but I'm almost positive that's in there somewhere. It might be in the diary book,
Right.
But there's allusions. There's different things that point me to the idea that he wants Laura to be the vessel that he can get sex and drugs and pain and sorrow all the time, whereas Leland's, so Laura is more. But if you take in context with the Return, maybe he wants Laura because he knows Laura's this good energy that he wants to, overcome. Who knows? Whatever.
Right.
But the idea, and it didn't sink into me for like years. Definitely not the first few times I watched Firewalk with Me when I was younger, and the original series. Like that whole idea of Bob wanting to be her and the arrangement with the ring and all that stuff, it completely went over my head. And it wasn't till later years or whatever that it's like, oh, okay. Because at the time I was younger and it was like serial killer movies and stuff, like, okay, so he's a demon that just wants to kill her, and all right. But yeah, now that there's so much more, potentially so much more going on, especially with the ring and that kind of stuff.
Now I'm just thinking about what Bob would be like as a teenage girl.
Right.
That.
Oh,
that would be insane.
And in the train car at the end, Laura, he puts a mirror in front of her, and Laura looks in the mirror, and she turns into Bob.
Right.
Yes.
So I mean,
and she's
it was kind of
terrified by that.
Like staring at me in the face for years, and then it just kind of at one point it all clicked, and I went, "Oh, okay, I got it."
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So we get another very weird moment here where Laura is, I don't know how I should describe it. It almost feels like she's possessed briefly or something, where she has like this furious, crazed look in her eyes when she's talking to Harold, and she says, "Fire walk with me." And then there's like that jump scare where she's in black and white makeup for a second. And we're going to see later on towards the end of the film a shot of Leland also in the black and white makeup, I believe, as he's approaching Glastonbury Grove. What is that about? What do we think about that?
I don't know if that's supposed to be Laura's doppelganger, or if we're just sort of seeing like a glimpse of her dark sociopathic side actually personified as what that looks like. But it's shown similar, like it's obviously the same makeup that Leland has, but it's shown similarly to a lot of these like mouth shots of the like lodge beings, whether they're eating the creamed corn or just like towards the end of the film. There's a lot of the different shots of like Jumping Man's mouth, and I don't know. It's like a similar one of those where I think it's just sort of evoking this concept of Laura's darkness and just sort of characterizing it as this really scary Winkies-esque jump scare.
Yeah, and there's also, now that I'm thinking about it, there's also the Wyndham Earle shot too, right? Where he has like the same sort of makeup on.
Right. That is Wyndham Earle, that's right. Yeah, that's right.
I think that what you just said, this ties right in, because right before that shot is, what does Bob, Harold says, "What does Bob want?" She says, he wants to be me or he'll kill me. And he says other things too. And then he's like, what does he say? And then she says, "Fire walk with me," or whatever. So that jump scare happens right after she tells him he wants to be me or he'll kill me. So I kind of take it as that's what evil Laura would look like, or like that's what Laura would look like if Bob was inside her. But again, it's just a flat, because Leland is the same at the end, and that's when he kind of howls at the moon, and that's when the doors, the curtains appear, so people think like fear and love open the door. There's also the idea of Wyndham Earle having the black lips and the black teeth because he's out supposedly looking for Glastonbury Grove, and people think that that's the scorched engine oil. Like people drink it to maybe drinking that oil or touching the oil, it has something to do with opening the door. It's just never on screen because we don't see Earl do that. We don't see Leland do that, but Leland's right at the gate, right? And he gives the same kind of. So Fear and Love open the door, supposedly. They don't really explore that too much more other than the original show. But yeah, I think that Laura, Leland, and Wyndham Earl, whiteface with black lips, and it just represents the shadow self, the shadow side or something. But I think that's what I think it's supposed to. Harold gets a glimpse of what Laura would look or be like with Bob inside her or totally possessed or whatever.
Right. It's like sort of it's like a cinematic representation of Laura's fear of becoming Bob.
Oh, there you go. Yeah,
right? I guess you could say.
Yeah. Because she is frightened by it, even more so than Harold. Like I don't think Harold really reacts to it. She does. So we can maybe even presume that is something that she experienced rather than something that actually happened.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So Laura is apparently she makes out with Harold a little bit before she goes. At this point, it's very clear that Laura is very confused romantically. It's not just like a typical, teenage promiscuity thing. It's like her emotions are just all over the place, and she is like very much in this tangled web with all of these boys / men, and she is in a very manic state. At least that's how I feel like it's depicted. Like I don't think she actually is like in love with any of these people, but it's like she's just sort of reaching out for affection any way that she can find it, I guess.
Yep. Agree 100%.
Yeah. So hey guys, we're actually going to cut this episode short right here. We're going quite long, and as I'm sure you've noticed, we're actually not that far into the movie yet. So what we've decided to do is to split this episode into 2 parts, and we're going to release the second half of our Fire Walk With Me episode next week, most likely. And Jeremiah, fortunately for us, will be joining us again for that discussion. People who listen to our podcast about the return know that we kind of like to really sink in and do a pretty deep dive, and we're pretty long-winded about this stuff, so it's not surprising that a 2-hour, 15-minute movie is going to take up more of our time than an hour-long episode of television. So we're having a great time recording this. We love talking about this stuff, and we didn't want to just go ahead and rush the conversation. So we're actually just going to pick it up next week. So, we hope you guys enjoyed this episode, and we hope you'll stick around for part 2 of our discussion of Twin Peaks Fire Walk With Me. Thanks a lot, guys.